Hey guys, good morning, and thanks for dialing in here. Saturday morning, rivalry weekend, a huge weekend in college football. Started off great on Thursday. We'll recap quickly Thursday, Friday, and then just some thoughts here on the look ahead to Saturday. And we'll get you out of here on your Saturday morning. Sorry again for the Saturday morning call. We don't really like these Saturday morning dial-ins, especially when they just pop up on your radar. But had to really digest last night's win, and we'll start there with Georgia. Georgia, a great tough win for the Bulldogs. Just quickly on the game, Georgia got down 17-0, ended up starting to make their way back. The most dire it looked like was about 5 minutes left in the fourth quarter. Georgia Tech scores to go up 27-13. You have Georgia fans starting to leave the stadium. Georgia scores 2 touchdowns to come back in the game and pushes it to overtime, ends up going to 8 overtimes. Both teams having trouble scoring that 2-point conversion, and much covered during the game that you only have so many 2-point plays, and as you get into the 7th and 8th overtime, you start running out of plays. And I think that revealed what I think is one of the key weaknesses on this Georgia team, which I'll get to, but just to highlight the game from a high level. Great tough win. We said on Tuesday, it's important to win games that are ugly, that games where you're about to be upset, and the sign of a good team is winning these games ugly. I think that's what Georgia did. Credit, of course, to Georgia Tech. Really scrappy team. Haynes King, a really tough physical quarterback running the ball. They were able to run, I think, for over 200 yards against this Georgia defense, and really strong performance and display from Georgia Tech as a program. But coming back to winning games ugly, I think the difference between Georgia and Ole Miss and Alabama right now is Ole Miss and Alabama couldn't do that this year. Both have lost 2 games that they probably should have won ugly, whereas Georgia has been able to pull off wins, both against Kentucky and then also here against Georgia Tech. And Georgia Tech's a good football team, of course. They'll finish the season at I believe 7-5 or 8-5. So a great team. But let's just go to the concerns I have with this Georgia team. So, I think the big thing with Georgia and focusing on the offense is when this team can't run the ball, it is entirely driven by Carson Beck. And that's because there really isn't that much in the way of skill position players. I think, Georgia's receivers after graduating McConkey and then Bowers and them going off to the NFL, it really is a receiving core that's all that produces based on scheming guys open versus the players one-on-one winning matchups. And I think you really saw that in that overtime period. What I was thinking of that entire overtime period was that Alabama-Auburn game in 2011, when Bryce Young brought the team down the field. They weren't doing anything all game. They were down 10-3. They go on, I think, a 98-yard touchdown drive to tie the game, 10-10. And then you have, multiple overtime possessions for both teams against Auburn. And if you watch that game, just go watch the overtime. That entire overtime was just based on Bryce Young just getting the ball to John Mechie, and he was winning his one-on-one matchups, and that's why Alabama just kept scoring in overtime. Compare that to Georgia, where Georgia now is having to run all of these, more 2-point conversion plays where you're picking people, you're trying to use misdirection, and these receivers just they can't separate, and they also can't catch the ball. I'm surprised by how much Georgia receivers have struggled catching the ball, particularly the fact that it's not just one receiver, it's multiple receivers. Lovett had a few drops. Smith had a few critical drops in the game. And I think it really makes this team an entirely Carson Beck driven team, and which is fine because Carson Beck at times plays like a top 10 pick in the draft, which he did last night. And at times he plays like a quarterback and makes decisions that are very questionable, like you saw in the Alabama game, and maybe the Ole Miss game. So, I also think it's a spot that Georgia doesn't want to be in. They don't want to be levered to their quarterback's performance. But that's just how it's going to be in this postseason. So that's on Georgia. I think these concerns I have about Georgia, I still think they're a top 5 team. But when you start thinking about them against Oregon and Ohio State, these are the things that would start to get me a little concerned, because I think if they play someone like an Ohio State, can they actually run the ball in Ohio State? I'm not really sure. So one other just quick thing to be aware of on this Georgia game is, I think this Georgia win gives them a huge leg up on Miami in terms of seeding as we look to the college football playoff. So now you'll have Georgia and Miami, common opponent. Miami lost to Georgia Tech, whereas Georgia beat Georgia Tech. And granted, both of these were one possession games. But, I think the committee and if you follow what I've said over the last two videos, I think the committee has overvalued the ACC, and but they cannot ignore something like this that's hard evidence, a common opponent. And where this matters is if both teams win the conference championship or both teams lose their conference championship games. Because, let's start on where if you lose. If you both lose your conference championship games, seeding becomes really important. You don't want to be that 8 seed that has to play a 9 seed. Right now, you'd have to play Tennessee. That's a really tough game. But let's say you beat that 9 seed. Then you have to go play the number 1 team in the country, which is going to be either Ohio State or Oregon. That's a marked difference from potentially being the 7 or 6 seed. Now, if you're the 7 seed, you're playing the SEC champion. Again, really tough game, but a lot less of a tough game versus the number 1 team. And then also, if you're able to slip into that 6th spot, that's really important, because then you can go play the number 3 team, which is going to be a lot weaker than the 1 and 2 team. Conversely, if both teams win, then you have the ACC, or excuse me, I'm just getting a text message here. So we're gonna have to wrap this up quick. I'm getting demanded back into the house, but you have again the SEC with Georgia having again a leg up on Miami if they both win, to be that 2 seed rather than that 3 seed. So just I'll be really quick here on the look ahead to today. I think I guess we're really well focused on is there's a lot of talk about how Alabama and Ole Miss can get back into the playoff. I think I'm pretty off consensus here, but I think there only needs to be one loss from either SMU or Miami today. I think there's a lot of talk about can the ACC get 2 teams in, and if both Miami and SMU win today, I think people think that they're guaranteed to get the ACC is guaranteed to get 2 teams in, two teams in, because you can't take out that team that loses the ACC championship. But I think if SMU or Miami loses today, that really puts Alabama back into it, assuming that team that let's say SMU loses today at Cal, or I'm not sure if they're hosting Cal or if they're going to Cal, but if they lose to Cal, just say now they're a 2-loss team, they would probably have to lose the ACC championship as well, to just completely knock them out, because if they get the automatic bid, then it becomes kind of, do you still sneak in 2 teams? But I think if you just drop one of those teams out of the field, let's just say it's SMU, that really opens up the door to one other team, and it becomes a bubble question, right? And to me, it becomes Alabama versus Clemson. Now, I think the committee needs to correct itself. We talked about it on Tuesday. I'll go through it really quickly. Alabama being ranked behind Clemson is solely based on Alabama having 1 extra loss in their column versus Clemson. Alabama has 3 losses, Clemson has 2. But in terms of when you stack up the metrics, not even thinking about the eye test, when you stack up the metrics, Alabama has more ranked wins, Clemson has 0. If Clemson beats South Carolina today, they would say, we have a ranked win. But guess what? Alabama also beat South Carolina. So that just, to me, neutralizes that. Plus, Alabama has more ranked wins. Alabama against the common opponent also, they beat Georgia, whereas Clemson lost by 31 to Georgia on a neutral field. So I think that's important to take into account. Hopefully the committee corrects itself on this, and if one of the ACC teams lose this week, Alabama starts kind of getting their way into the college football playoff. And I think you'll have to see that next Tuesday in terms of where they rank Alabama versus Clemson, assuming both Alabama and Clemson can win. And I think Alabama, it's going to be a tough game for them. I think the spread, last I looked at it, was 11.5. I think Auburn probably covers the spread. I'm not going to be trading this game. I think it's pretty close to call, but I think this Auburn team beat A&M last week, albeit they were at home. But a similar mobile quarterback that A&M has to Jalen Milroe, and they were able to kind of perform well. I think Alabama also needs to get Ryan Williams involved. I think on College Game Day this morning they mentioned that Alabama's receiver Ryan Williams, in the last 3 games he's had under 40 yards officially. I think last week we all know that the catch or the call to wipe out the touchdown catch for Ryan Williams was one of the worst calls of the year. But officially he has less than 40 yards in 3 games. I think the other things to just watch out for today, there's a few ACC, SEC matchups. You have Louisville playing Kentucky. You had Georgia Tech and Georgia last night. You have Florida State. So, the reason that's important is because you want concrete evidence to get an extra SEC team into the field over an ACC team if you're an SEC fan. And people look at these conference records against each other, which I don't really think is the best metric because it's stacking up teams, up and down the conference. But particularly this year where the SEC is arguing that the conference is so deep, it's important to have a really strong record, especially against the ACC, which you'll have, I think, 3 or 4 games to kind of support that this weekend. I think the last 2 things on single games I'll mention is I'm pretty bullish on Ohio State today against Michigan. I think the sense I get around the Ohio State program is that there's so much pent-up frustration over the last 3 years that they're ready to just come out at 12 o'clock and just take it out on Michigan. I think everyone gets involved. I think Ibuka has a great game. I think Jeremiah Smith has a great game. The one thing that concerns me a little bit, and the reason I'm actually not going to be involved in trading this game is I think it's a 19.5 point spread, is the one key risk is can Michigan, the key to their defense and really their whole team is this, besides the running game, which I think Ohio State stacks up well against, is can Michigan's defensive line, which is a strength of their team, get pressure on Will Howard against that patchwork Ohio State offensive line? And can they also prevent Ohio State from running the ball? Because if Ohio State's just solely a passing team, that makes it, they become a lot more one-dimensional, and they can't really dominate in the trenches like they've done in a lot of these games against Penn State, against Indiana, even against Oregon early on when they were having a lot of success. They were running the ball well. I think that's the key for Michigan. Can that defensive line, which has dominated in a lot of games this year, can they really rise up and affect Will Howard, and also the running game against Ohio State? But I think Ohio State ends up winning this game, and to me, I think it's probably by 2 touchdowns or more. And then lastly, I think the top play of the day is this Texas A&M game. I am so excited for this game. Again, I think be one of the craziest atmospheres in college football, probably since what comes to mind is that 2016 Penn State whiteout versus Ohio State. I think the 2012 LSU-Alabama game when Les Miles said this is where dreams come to die. I think it's going to be that type of energy and probably even more. There's a great video on YouTube. I forget the channel that put it out, but maybe I'll link to it in the show notes here, that describes the Texas A&M rivalry and how it got so big over the last 13 years when they haven't played. But super excited for this game. I think Texas, the thing that I really like about Texas here is I think Texas's team total, which is 27.5, I think they hit the over on that. I think their first half total they probably hit, which is 13.5. I think this Texas team, I think they win this game. A little uncomfortable saying that they're going to win by more than 5.5. So I think the key question for everyone to ask themselves is Texas A&M going to score at least 23 points against statistically the best defense in the SEC, which is Texas? That's a key question for everyone to think about. But I think Texas gets the 28 points in this game. I think it'll be a strong game. I think from Sark, I think he'll be ready to go. This is the type of game, in my eyes, it's almost a little bit like Michigan, where Sark comes out and he has a great script, and it's really just watching a technician call the game and watching Ewers execute it. Again, Ewers is coming in with that ankle sprain, so it'll be interesting to see how that affects his play. But I think Texas is positioned to win this game. The the 2 things that give me concern again is Texas A&M on the road, night game. That's going to be huge, and that's going to, I think, affect the game a little bit. That's probably why the line right now is at 5.5. And the second thing is, Texas A&M, you look at their head coach, Mike Elko, one of his strengths is being able to really confuse the opposing team's quarterback. And, if you watch Ewers, really where he struggled, think about the Georgia game where he was confused a lot of times by this Georgia defense. So, what I think would maybe concern me and what keeps the game a little bit close is, does Ewers have a disastrous turnover, whether it's on an interception or a fumble or with some pass rush, where he gets affected? I think that could happen. I still think Texas gets to the 28 points, but that's what I think makes me a little bit uncomfortable, saying that Texas is going to win by more than 6 is A&M able to keep the game close by just causing a lot of negative plays on Texas because of that great defense in the schematic. So I think that's a quick commentary on what I'm looking forward to today. One of the best days of the year in college football. Today, the games, Michigan, Ohio State, not as, I think this goes to show you how strong the rivalry is. It's going to be a huge game. Maybe not as hyped up as it was last year when both teams were undefeated, but still, if you just look at the slate, a great slate today. Really excited to watch the games today, and again the last week of the regular season, and you'll just see a lot of the passion. This is what you love about college football: the passion that the fan bases have, and the hate that they have against each other, and also a little bit of mutual respect, but really just the hate and the energy the teams and their fan bases will play with. And you saw it last night with Georgia Tech going down to the wire with Georgia. I think you'll see a couple of those again today, where you see teams that are 14 plus point underdogs taking it all the way down to the wire, maybe some upsets. But one of the best days of the year for college football, and really looking forward to it. And stay tuned for some rapid reaction tonight on the day's thoughts. But thanks for dialing in this morning. Everyone have a great day of college football, and enjoy your Saturday.